President Trump says the U.S. will increase sanctions on Iran. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo visited Saudi Arabia Wednesday. The kingdom suspects Iran is to blame for an attack on Saudi oil facilities over the weekend. On his way to the meeting, Secretary Pompeo repeatedly called the attack, quote, an act of war. Earlier, Saudi government officials presented physical evidence they say proves the attack was, quote, sponsored by Iran. Speaking to reporters today, President Trump said that many options are on the table.
There are many options, and there's the ultimate option, and there are options a lot less than that, and we'll see. We're in a very powerful position. Right now, we're in a very, very powerful position.
You say the ultimate option? Are you talking
No, I'm saying the ultimate option, meaning go in war. No, I'm not talking about that ultimate option, no.
CBS News national security correspondent David Martin joins me now. David, thanks so much for being with us. So there have been some developments in the last 24 hours. What have we learned since yesterday about the situation?
Well, what we've learned is that this was an attack which U.S. officials say was approved by Iran's supreme leader, but on the condition that it be conducted in such a way that Iran could deny it. Well, I think it's fair to say that the attack itself was a success. They really did severe damage to these Saudi oil facilities, but the plan to deny it, I think, is falling apart. The wreckage of the missiles, cruise missiles and drones that were fired at the Saudi oil facilities have been recovered. They were clearly manufactured in Iran. They have circuit boards which can be, but have not yet, but can be reverse engineered so that you can retrace the exact navigational route they followed from their point of origin to the target. And I think most easy for most people to understand is there are satellite photos that were taken by the U.S. of an air base in southwestern Iran where preparations for the attack were being made. The problem was that at the time, the U.S. did not realize the significance of those photos, and so the photos were useless in heading off this attack, but they are proving valuable in pinning the attack on Iran.
So in light of that information, we heard President Trump say that he is pursuing increased sanctions and that all other options are on the table. What specific military actions could he be referring to?
Well, the military options are basically in two categories. One are attacks against Iranian oil facilities. So in other words, it would be a direct tit-for-tat response to the damage done to the Saudi oil facilities. And the other one would be attacks against facilities belonging to the Iranian Revolutionary Guards, because this attack was carried out by the aerospace force of the Iranian Revolutionary Guards. So those are two military options that are on the table. I'm told that when President Trump was briefed on these options on Monday, he insisted that if there was going to be a retaliatory strike, Saudi Arabia would have to contribute to that strike. And Secretary of State Pompeo is in Saudi Arabia now, and I am sure that is one of the things he is trying to find out from the Saudis, is what their appetite would be. And then of course, there's the attitude of the rest of the world. And I think particularly many American allies in Europe are very skeptical of these American claims that Iran did it, and they're going to want to have their own experts look at this evidence before they're satisfied that Iran really committed what Secretary of State Pompeo calls an act of war.
So, David, just one last question before we let you go. Is there any indication of a time frame then at all, or even a rough guess as to when there might be some kind of movement on a military response?
Well, President Trump is scheduled to meet with his advisors again on Friday. So that would be the first chance, I suppose, that he could get all his advisors together and make a decision. But I think he'll want first to hear from Secretary of State Pompeo and what the Saudis and the United Arab Emirates have said to him. And then you've got the whole question of the United Nations General Assembly coming up next week in New York at the UN. And do you really want to take military action before such a gathering of world leaders? Do you really want to take military action at all? Because the danger here is really pretty clear. Iran did commit an act of war, a state-on-state attack against Saudi Arabia's most valuable asset. It would seem that you can't just let them get away with it, but you also have to be very careful so that act of war doesn't turn into an all-out war.
Right. Very much something that clearly a lot of people are quite anxious about and trying to figure out perhaps what the next steps here for the United States might be. David Martin at the Pentagon for us. David, thank you very much.
Sure thing.
And joining me now are Nancy Cordes and Paula Reid. Nancy is CBS News chief congressional correspondent, and Paula is a CBS News White House correspondent. Welcome to both of you. So, Nancy, we heard from David the sort of military kind of landscape and what it is that President Trump may be factoring in as he weighs what move the United States should take next. How have Democrats there on Capitol Hill been responding to the way that President Trump has been handling this situation with Iran?
Well, Elaine, they seem to be much more certain about Iran's culpability in this attack than they were when we spoke to them even 24 or 48 hours ago. And that's because of the evidence that David just laid out. And they're expecting to get even more information in an all-Senate briefing tomorrow. The Democrats we've spoken to are pretty comfortable with the new sanctions that the president announced today, less comfortable with the idea of a military strike. They want more information about what that would look like and who would be involved. They're nervous about the idea of a go-it-alone strategy without our allies, but they're also nervous about the idea that had been floated by the president earlier in the week that perhaps we would be taking our cues or direction from Saudi Arabia. They say the U.S. should be calling the shots here. And so they're going to want to hear more in that briefing about the array of options. And they insist that if the president is going to authorize any military strikes, that he needs to get authorization from Congress first.
Well, Paula, up until this point, there had been talk that President Trump might reduce sanctions on Iran as an incentive for a new nuclear deal. Does this latest escalation take that off the table?
It does, and it raises more questions than provides answers. For example, what else is there to sanction against Iran? And would this be in lieu of military action? Would this be a prelude to military action? So far, the Trump administration has been applying its maximum pressure campaign against Tehran. They've pretty much frozen Iran out of the international banking system, zeroed out Iranian oil exports. The Trump administration believes this campaign is working, and with this tweet today, he suggests there is no sign that they're going to back off of this.
Well, Paula, President Trump also announced his new national security advisor. He's the State Department's special envoy for hostage affairs, Robert O'Brien. What should we know about him?
Well, Elaine, he's a lawyer who hails from L.A. He has impressed the president with his ability to extract Americans from overseas. But what's unclear is how different he'll really be from Ambassador Bolton. They're both known for their hawkish views, and he's coming into this job at a time when the president is really facing a pretty critical decision about how to handle Iran. Now, earlier today, he addressed reporters. He said he's looking very closely at the situation with Iran, and he will, quote, brief the president privately on how to handle the situation.
Well, Nancy, we've learned on another topic that the White House is ruling out universal background checks in its proposal for gun legislation. So how does that impact the debate on Capitol Hill?
Well, it doesn't kill the debate because while the White House may be ruling out universal background checks, it does appear to be coalescing around the idea of expanding background checks to apply to all commercial gun sales. And while Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, the leaders of the Democrats in the House and Senate, have taken a tough line and said universal background checks or bust, there are a lot of Democrats, frankly, who would rally behind that at the end of the day if it looked like that was a proposal that could get a bipartisan vote in the House and the Senate. So that idea certainly appeals to a lot of Democrats in the Senate who've been trying to find some kind of compromise. And I can tell you that the Attorney General is on Capitol Hill for a second day, meeting with a variety of Republicans from across the conservative spectrum, some very right-wing, pro-Second Amendment senators, some more moderate on this issue, to try to both sell the package of ideas that the White House is looking at right now and also to get feedback from them. He has been meeting this afternoon with Lindsey Graham, who has come out in support of what the White House is trying to do, partly because they're looking at one of his chief ideas around red flag laws. But he has also met with some Republicans who aren't that open to the idea of expanding background checks, who view it as just more gun control that won't help to solve the problem. So that kind of gives you a sense of the uphill battle that the White House is facing. And I'm sure that Paula can tell you that another part of the uphill battle here is that the president himself still hasn't gotten firmly behind these ideas. The White House said today that that all of this is still up in the air, and that's going to make it very, very difficult to win over a lot of Republicans who are on the fence themselves.
Right. So, Paula, is it clear what is the White House, what is the president willing to support when it comes to gun legislation?
Well, Nancy's absolutely right. It appears this is still in the process of notice and comment, if you will. They're still going through this negotiation. The president has signaled that he is open to something like mention to me. Now, you'll remember under federal law, checks are only required on purchases from federally licensed gun dealers. So that proposal it tries to find a middle ground by expanding checks to gun purchases from internet sales and gun shows, but not requiring them if you buy a gun from a family member or someone you know at church. The president has been looking for reaction from members to see what kind of adjustments they could make to that to make it something that they may be willing to support. Now, of course, this proposal has come up in the past. In 2013, it only received support from 4 members of the GOP. But at least one source familiar with this negotiation suggests that there are reasons to be optimistic because a lot's changed in the past 6 years. They point to the fact that obviously we have a new president. There's been a lot more action at the state and local level following this increase in mass shootings. Technology has changed. They also see the Justice Department right now more as a partner. Whereas under the Obama Justice Department, particularly with Attorney General Holder, it was a very antagonistic relationship that he had with the GOP. It was harder to really coalesce around any of these proposals. So here they do believe that perhaps with some adjustments, a proposal like this could be something the president will get behind. But at this point, we don't expect a proposal this week or even next. It'll likely have to wait until after the president returns from his visit to New York and the UN next week.
Well, Nancy, for roughly 5 hours last night, Senate Democrats held the floor in an effort to pressure Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell to allow a vote on gun legislation. Here are a few of their comments.
What are we doing in the United States Senate? The answer is nothing. Nothing.
They're hoping that if they hide long enough, this will just blow over.
The American people expect the Senate to do its job and to take action to make their lives better and safer. Unfortunately, that isn't happening. And the American people are paying the price.
So, Nancy, is it likely that we will see Leader McConnell allow a vote on gun legislation?
He has said repeatedly that he will allow a vote on gun legislation, but only if it has the president's support. And that would have to be a really rock solid support in order to get Republicans on board. At the same time, if Democrats feel that what comes out of these negotiations is so watered down in order to get Republican support that it's essentially meaningless, then you might see Democrats jump ship. So this is still a very, very difficult path. And the fact that, as Paula said, these discussions are dragging on, and we may now have to wait a week or two to see what the White House comes up with, is something that's very troubling to the lawmakers who have been sort of the key negotiators on this, because they know that the opposition to an expansion of background checks or any other kind of gun legislation is organized and has the president's ear, the NRA in particular, and they worry that the longer this drags out, the more that those organizations that have the president's ear can get to him, try to convince him that this legislation won't accomplish anything and that he should walk away from it. And those organizations have had some success in the past, so the key negotiators are trying to bend the president's ear as well, but they do worry that the more time that goes on here, the worse their chances get.
And Paula, you have some reporting on what the White House's legislative agenda for this fall is. What did you learn?
Well, while most of the talk on Capitol Hill and in the press right now is about guns, there's a lot of other priorities, particularly for the president. His #1 priority is his trade deal between Canada, U.S., and Mexico. He wants to be able to go into 2020 showing that he delivered on the promise of negotiating better trade deals. Now, in talking to a source familiar with the ongoing negotiations on the Hill, we are told that they are, quote, guardedly optimistic that something could get done in the fall. The Democrats have expressed some concerns about this deal, especially with some of the labor aspects of this, and also environmental concerns. We're told that the conversations are accelerating and that there is reason to be optimistic that they may be able to allay some of these concerns on the part of Democrats to maybe get this done in the next few months. There's plenty of other things out there: taxes, prescription drugs, infrastructure. We're told the White House would be happy to engage on any of those issues, but it's unlikely that they'll be able to get too much done as we go into 2020. Once you enter the political season, it somewhat disincentivizes some folks to get together and collaborate. But one place that there is clearly no agreement is on the House Democrats' use of their time and energy to pursue impeachment. And I've spoken with many sources here in the White House over the past several months. They believe that Democrats are really overplaying their hand here, and that this will ultimately play to the president and the White House's advantage in 2020.
All right, Nancy Cordes and Paula Reid, thank you both very much. Appreciate it.